this meeting, we're going to discuss Metro Fund allocation accountability. So thank you for the members who were able to join us. Currently, we have Councilmember Spain, Councilwoman at Large Allen, and Councilmember Gregg, and myself. We do know that some other members may be en route because of traffic, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So as you all know, this conversation just kind of came out. We were having a conversation with regards to accountability, like financial accountability, and there were conversations about the Arts Commission and if we need a council member or not on it, and that kind of led to some deeper conversations around financial accountability as a whole, and wanted to make sure that we are, we trust our departments, we trust our boards and commissions, but we also want to make sure that we're being, fiscally responsible and maintaining the right balance of autonomy with transparency and oversight. So just wanting to kind of, talk through that conversation, get some ideas about what that could potentially look like. I've thought through some ideas and would love to discuss those with you all, but also hear just as a body what we think we need and what feels like a right combination for us. So starting off, the first kind of topic that we wanted to really talk about was like Metro Council's role with financial oversight. And Amanda, are you here for finance today? Can you talk to us? Can you introduce yourself? And do you mind talking to us a little bit about just kind of what the council's role is currently when it comes to like financial oversight for like departments, boards, and commissions, like what kind of say we have in this. Director Darby, you may also want to speak to it as well.
I think part of what I'll do, we'll hand it off to Director Darby. However, the most important thing that the council is responsible for is, of course, setting the annual budget, and that actually sets the rules and the amount of funding. Certainly for the general fund and other funds for the year. And then council throughout the year has various pieces of legislation that brings back reporting that they can ask about at any given time throughout their committee process. Obviously, there are a lot of other financial pieces that the budget and finance team and committee takes up, such as contracts that are dictated what must be approved by council, as well as grants and any type of donations or any type of really money in that is outside of the budgetary process, or money out that's going out outside of the budgetary process. So really that's the key role of council. Director Darby, would you add to that?
I think you covered it pretty well. The one thing that the council does primarily is the budget process at the end of every fiscal year in preparation for the next fiscal year. One thing that the council has the ability to do throughout that year is to, ask questions about how the appropriations are being handled throughout the year. That, aside from, reviewing contracts, I think that is probably one of the things that the council has the oversight ability to do.
Thank you. Can you all speak at all to like maybe separation of duties or separation of powers, like as far as, you have the mayor's office and the autonomy of the mayor's office, and then the roles of the council, and then the roles of the various departments when it comes to like their spending?
Sure. So essentially, council holds the power of the purse. When we go back to, I guess, Government 101, the power of the purse is the money is detailed and determined where it will be spent in the budgetary process. And you'll see on those budgetary ordinances, we actually use that ordinance throughout the entire rest of the year. We have our own version that's an Excel sheet that we actually come back to regularly because that is considered the law. And so that is, the council sets the amount of money, and then the mayor's office, as well as the department, or in conjunction with departments, I should say, actually carries out the use of those resources. And so, really, if you think about it, it's done by fund, and there are rules, if you read the ordinance in detail, what can and can't be done in terms of transferring those funds from one place to the other, or even moving things around. And so you approve the ordinance each year, it's not just approving the numbers, although that is, for us finance folks, we like that a lot. It's actually telling us what we can and can't do with those funds across the period of the year. So that that is the first piece, and then the balance is we're doing those things. And when the next budget period comes around, it's not uncommon for council to ask, hey, we did this last year, what did you do with it? And because that maybe is something that gives council the ability to say, I thought we were going to do this and we didn't, and there's reasons, we might allocate those resources differently.
Thank you. That goes right in alignment with one of the suggestions that I have, or one of the recommendations that I wanted to make to the committee, but I will save that for the committee discussion portion. Mr. Rosenberg, could you speak to an update on where you all are with the special group looking at boards and commissions? And if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, Dave Rosenberg, Mayor's Office. Thanks for having me. So the Board and Commission Working Group's last meeting was on Friday. We discussed the first piece of legislation that I hope you will see very soon. We also discussed the membership of boards and commissions, specifically those boards and commissions with fewer than 7 voting members and more than 11 voting members, and discussed, bless you, parameters around potential recommendations regarding those boards and commissions. For example, feedback that we received from board and commission members, recommendations from the Metro leaders who are responsible for working closely with those boards and commissions, the requirements for specific seats on those boards and commissions, and statutory requirements outside of our realm. So we'll be continuing on with that process.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Is there any conversation about, as far as like the board makeup, like one thing that we've kind of discussed is a conversation around when does it make sense for a council member to serve on a board or commission versus maybe when it doesn't make sense. Have you all had any conversation about what that might look like?
We have not. I would say that boards and commissions with council members largely fall into one of 3 categories. Those that review specific projects within council districts, like short-term appeals and planning. Those where the elected official participation is mandated by federal or state law, like the Metro Action Commission, and those that are advisory in nature, like the Sustainability Advisory Committee. We haven't discussed making any recommendations on council member participation in additional legislative bodies.
Okay, and if the body, let's say we have a working group on boards and commissions, or a special call meeting, or a conversation on Council Connect, or whatever that looks like. But if the body, has this conversation and maybe we come to somewhat of a consensus and we say, hey, we feel like these 3 boards over here maybe need a council member, or we think it makes sense for these boards to have a council member. I guess, are you all open to that conversation? What would that look like? I mean, I guess that would be something that we would change legislatively. But if council members have suggestions for changes to boards and commissions, like what is the route to get that to the committee?
2 points, speaking to what you spoke to. First of all, any of these changes will come to the council in form of legislation. But, the goal of the working group is to have this be a holistic approach and hopefully not one-off changes. So we more than welcome council member involvement and engagement. You're always free to reach out to me or anybody on it, but I would defer to Councilmember Sepulveda's vision for the best way for council to, or what might be the best way for that to happen, ensure that council has the opportunity to have the discussion and the adequate voice in this.
Okay, so maybe seeing if Councilwoman Sepulveda wanted to do a meeting, or if she wanted to kind of spearhead that conversation, so that I just want to make sure that there's a way that council members can give feedback to you all's committee.
Me too. Yes, please.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Council Lady Allen and then Council Lady Sora.
So along those lines, I mean, we all know we've been having this discussion about a specific committee for quite some time, and it's coming back up again, I think, at our next meeting. And we would love to have guidance from your group, because y'all are immersed in the whole of that. Can we ask that get bumped up to an impending agenda in terms of having the discussion about council member participation on, and what the criteria might be, and set a date and let us know when that's going to happen? Because, I mean, I can't see the value of us going ahead and passing this legislation that's coming up that we deferred so we could have this meeting, because we recognize the value of the very deliberate look that y'all are giving this. So I would love to see that group take this up, at a time where we know that it's happening and those who want to participate could provide the input that you're asking for. So when's your next meeting?
Okay, absolutely. We haven't set it yet.
Okay.
It'll be in the next couple of weeks, I'd imagine. I would say, so Councilmember Porterfield's legislation does not affect the membership of the Arts Commission. It ensures annual oversight of the criteria process. I know there's a substitute that fiddles with the membership. So as Arts Commission, of course, has 15 members. It's more than 11, so it's one that we're looking at. And we're happy to make recommendations, but really want to make sure that we have adequate council input, whether that's a meeting discussing that specific topic or however y'all might see fit on where you want, how many boards and commissions you want council members to be serving on, or how many boards and commissions you want each council member to be serving on. Arts Commission certainly doesn't fall into one of the three categories we're in now, so it would be opening up kind of a different type of thing.
Gotcha.
But
And that's helpful information.
yeah, but
So,
yeah, I definitely take your point, and it'd be helpful to have the information sooner than later.
yeah, if we could.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely.
Councilor Sora?
Coming back to the Arts Commission, I think one of the reasons why there's a push for having a council member on that particular commission is a discussion that's been going on for almost a year now, going back and forth. And even if it's not financial oversight, I'm one of the people that believe that having a council member on a commission has its advantages. I've served on about 4. And other than what we do financially, I also think that council members has a wealth of knowledge based on all the conversations that we have overall that you can bring to conversation. So, considering that this is something that is very ongoing, considering the fact that that board has relatively new board members, a lot of changes still going on, director is still interim. I mean, it's still going through a lot of changes, and it's one of the reasons why I felt there needs to be somebody on there. So, considering that this is taking us a whole long time, what is your group's position if we decide we want to go ahead and put someone in a non-voting power on this board, and then, because you all are still taking your time and I don't know how long it's going to take. So would that be against your procedure if we take this one? It's a special case, it's a special situation, it's something that we've been pushing and pushing and pushing for months, and we still haven't made a decision. So will that be contrary to your plan in the sense that if we go ahead and make a decision, and then you all can still come back later and tell us where you fit into all this? Because I do think, personally, that is a board that I really think will benefit from somebody sitting on that. So
I
can we
would say that
can we do
we'll
that?
work with whatever
we decide.
council does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for those questions. And thank you for also saying that you all will work with whatever the council decides. And you also said, just wanted to make sure we're clear, you also said that it would be y'all's preference if this came through as one package as opposed to making various changes to different boards. Did I understand that correctly?
I think it's most important that where we end up at the end of this process is a place where we've had the holistic conversation. I think I'm more squeamish about a situation where recommendations come through with council input, and then there's a sudden change to a few boards that creates inconsistency in the approach, and we end up kind of back where we are now. I think I've got personal opinions, and I don't know the virtue or the way to balance the decision, but ultimately it'll be helpful for everything to happen as a package.
So to the point that the legislation as presented without the substitute does not change the makeup of the board, right? So let's say that it passes currently without the substitute, but you all are still doing your work on the overhaul of the boards and commissions. Council members are going to be able to give feedback on which bodies we think make sense, however we choose to do that, through a meeting, through special call meeting, Council Connect, whatever that looks like. So council members come back and say, we think that there are 5 boards that we want people to serve on, and arts may be one of them, or it's 3 boards or 2 boards, whatever. But let's just say that arts is one of them. Or maybe this question will be for Director Darby, well, for both Director Darby and for Mr. Rosenberg. Would there then be anything, I would think that there's nothing that would stop us from then passing a piece of legislation that would say that these particular boards have a council member on them, and then we pass that legislation and implement it at that time, right? Like, I guess passing the legislation as it is now doesn't hurt the work that you're doing because it's not adding anyone. And once you all finish your work at that time, when we can determine if it makes sense to add people, we can always go back and add people when we're looking at you all's legislation.
I think so, but I guess the question to Director Darby is if there's legislation that puts a council member on the Arts Commission for 2 years and then subsequently legislation removes that position, would that council member then roll off at the time of passage?
I think the council member would roll off. I mean, each ordinance has the same level of authority, so the one that comes after one that was previously adopted would control. So if the council were to choose to put somebody on a commission and then later, a year later, chose to change the makeup of that commission altogether such that a council member was not a member, then yes, I think that member would roll off, but we would probably want to make it explicit in the legislation.
So actually reversing that, if we pass it and say we're leaving the makeup the same, we're not adding a person, if that's the version that passes, the special group is still doing their work, and let's say in 3 months, they're bringing legislation talking about board makeups, and based on council input and the work that they've done, they've now listed, or we've collectively listed, a few boards that may have a council member, and arts happens to be one of those boards. After we've passed this, if we pass something at that time, a council member can then be appointed at that time.
Yes.
Okay. Councilor Sora.
I think what is important, and I think what I want to stress, is time and timing. And the feedback that I've got from community members and people that work on what happened with the Arts Commission. And there's a split, but there's a lot of people that feels like, and I still say that I think during all of that ordeal, having a council member would be good for that. So if I thought this is where we're going to hear what the committee decided on whether members should be on it. I thought that's the whole point of this conversation, but it's not, so we have to delay it again. So my ask is this, and I understand not wanting to do something and scale it back and all of that, but I think it will be very critical, like Councilmember Allen said, if the committee will prioritize that discussion. Because that's the thing that we've been talking about for the last couple of months. And that's the question we've been trying to answer. And I know that a lot of us are saying, let's hold on. We think there's a need for it, but we want to hear what the work group has to say about it. And so we defer to the work group on so many occasions. So the fact that we haven't got a decision for something that I think is still a conversation in the community is where the frustration is for me. Does that make sense? And I think that with the Art Commission during this transition period, I really do think they do need that help. They may not need it in 3 months anymore, but we've taken that long. So if we do decide we're going to wait again, then I do think that it would be very important for the committee to make that the first thing, that with council input, with people coming and telling them why or why not, and give us a recommendation as soon as possible. That would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Mr. Rosenberg.
Thank you, Councilmember. Happy to do that. My hesitation, I think some others in the group have been that it would be stepping maybe a step too far just to make those kind of recommendations unsolicited. But if that's what you'd like us to do, then we'll definitely get into that. And of course, it's just a recommendation, but we'll happily take a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. One thing, I hadn't planned for us to get into the arts part this early, but we're here. So I also believe in letting things flow naturally. So we're here. So I'll share a few thoughts on my concerns about a council member being on there. And then we will continue on whatever else people want to talk about with regards to like the arts in this legislation. And then we'll kind of move to the next piece, which is because a big part of this conversation was also financial oversight overall, right? So that's boards and commissions, that's departments, that's more than one commission. So I do want to make sure that we lift that up, that there are some thoughts that I want to make sure that we discuss. I know that there was like confusion about whether or not the Arts Commission knew what the will of the body was. And there were council members who felt like, well, if there's a council member there, they would have been able to share what the body wanted. I spoke at both Arts Commission meetings prior to both votes that were taken. At the time, I was the chair of the Minority Caucus, so I spoke and talked about what we did in the budget. I'm actually accidentally just pulled up the speech that I wrote, and y'all know that I typically don't write speeches, but when I was just looking for my notes, I was searching arts, it came up, so I'm literally looking at the speech that I gave them, in which we talked about the $2 million, what we wanted the $2 million to be used for. You know, it's talking about equity, and it talks about the disparity study that was done at that period of time. If you're not familiar, there was a disparity study that was done under the previous director, but that later on it was advised that that particular disparity study could not be used, which is why we put money in the budget this time for a disparity study that could be used to help them determine how to bring about equitable funding. But at that time, we didn't know that that particular disparity study couldn't be used. So it was talking about like the recommendations, what the will of the council was. It talked about their committee for anti-racism and equity. So I say that to say they were very aware of what the body's intentions were. My concerns are one, I think that this should be a holistic approach so that we're not just kind of piecemealing and determining which departments or which boards or commissions are going to get a person. I mean, there are other boards or commissions that also may need additional support, and maybe nobody has their eye on that one. So I think that, yes, we've seen that they need support. We've also seen a myriad of changes already that has happened, from the previous director not being with us anymore, to having an interim director, to being in the search process looking for a director, to having almost a completely new committee, to making sure that there's funding for an equity study. So we've put so many supports in place. And I believe if there are additional supports that are needed, we should focus on those. I do think that, and it's probably the teacher in me, but it's the concept of like giving a man a fish versus, or giving a person a fish versus teaching a person a fish. And I think if we put a council member on there, we may be temporarily solving a problem, but we're not giving them the tools that they need to be successful in this position. And the beautiful thing to me about boards and commissions is that it's democratizing our government, and it is giving people who may not ever sit in the seats that we're sitting in, but it is giving them the opportunity to have a say in our government and how it goes. And it's kind of giving that to regular, everyday people, whether those are like attorneys or artists, or whether it's, you know, any individual that's in the community that decides they want to serve on a board or commission, is giving them a role and a say in our government. So it's really like a community-led process. And I think that by having a council member on there, seeing how council members are already in the budgetary process, we're the ones voting on the budget, we're the ones that are saying how much money that department or board or commission is getting anyway, it just feels like it can have undue influence. I have heard from commissioners who have said that they're not comfortable with this. Apparently, there may be commissioners that are comfortable with this. So, and to Council Lady Soror's point, I think that there are people in the community that are on both sides of this. I did speak with two young ladies. I had a meeting with them about 2 weeks ago, who said that they wanted a council member on there. That was the first I had heard. So everyone in the community that had reached out to me, that I had conversations with, were all adamantly against it. 2 weeks ago, 2 people reached out and said, hey, we would actually like this, those 2 individuals, and whoever they may represent. So I think, to Councilor Suarez's point, you do have people that are kind of on both sides of this issue, but I think that the most powerful thing we could do is to look at this as not like this knee-jerk reaction and say, they did something, we're going to do this, and instead saying, how can we holistically make sure that our boards and commissions are serving in a way that's serving Nashvillians and in a way that's equitable? And for me, that is by looking at all of them. So, Councilor DeSora.
I'll make it very brief because I think it's very important for me to say that to people that are serving on our boards and commission, that we're very grateful to them. It's a voluntary job, non-paid, and they're giving up their time. And so for people that are pushing to have someone like myself, it wasn't because of a lack of trust of the people doing the work, but more the support kind of thing. Like I said, when I serve on MAC or when I serve on the housing fund, I don't tell the board members what to do. But I found out that when I'm sitting in those boards, even the audit commission, you find out that there's a conversation that you can say, oh, this is what we talk about on council. And then when you come to council, you're able to also bring some of those conversations back. So when a board is struggling, especially during transition, that's what I'm talking about, a support, information giving. I think where we get into problem is when we have the delivery of the message. If you have a board member that want to impose their views on the commission, that's what we don't want, right? The position that I'm thinking about is someone to just sit there in an advisory role. No power, nothing, but just to assist. So I wanted to clarify that, and I'm okay with us looking at it holistically, but I also don't want to create the wrong impression that this is because they don't know what they're doing or we're not satisfied with it, but more like this is, can we support during this time where there's new people that may not know of the conversation that happened before, but there might be people there that will provide that. So I think it's important to say that, but thank you, Chair, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor DeSora. Before Councilmember Gregg speaks, there's an open invitation for any council members who would like to sit at the table, even if they're not on the committee. So won't call anyone out by name, but just know that there's a seat with your name on it. Councilmember Gregg, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a statement, if I will. I applaud the work that we're doing on a process level, and I think that's what we're trying to define and refine, is the process level. I think we also have to identify the micro challenges with this one commission who has historically struggled. I think we've got leadership style challenges from the past. I think we've got some disparity issues, and then the process issue on top of it. So I think this particular commission is unique, and although we're trying to refine the macro process, I think this one does deserve special attention, and I just want to make that comment.
Thank you. Thank you for lifting it up. Did anyone else want to weigh in on this where we are now? One thing that I wanted to ask, what does support look like, or what could support look like? So maybe that's a council member, maybe that's not a council member. In addition to that, what could supports for the commission look like? One thing that I was thinking about was that I wanted to, get y'all's thoughts on. If the council is saying, hey, we're going to give you all an extra $1 million to do project A, B, and C. And obviously we don't have a direct control over what they do, but we're saying that this is the intent of the money that's being given. Maybe that could be accompanied with like a letter. I mean, obviously in our committee, we talk about, when we're allocating money in the budget, we talk about the intent of that. I think finance does a great job in ensuring that people know where the intentions are of the money. I think that it may also provide a bit of comfort or maybe an extra layer of support if there is a letter, and I'm just throwing it out here, but maybe that's a letter, bless you, maybe that's a letter that comes from, like a joint letter from the budget chair and the director or the budget chair and the vice mayor and the director, so that it's not just coming from one person. So if the budget chair goes rogue and says something different, whatever. But if there's like some type of letter that would go to then that commission or that entity where we're giving the money to say, hey, we have allocated this money. It is our intent that this is where the money goes, so that we are making sure that it's clear to them how we are requesting that the money be spent. So wanted to get any thoughts on that. Councilmember Spain?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering if there is a process by which that kind of information funnels to the boards and commissions now. Is that, once the budget is passed, is that type of information communicated to those boards and commissions based on the council's action?
We'll go to either Director Darby or to Amanda or both. What is the process after we pass the budget? What is the process to make sure that a board or commission or department understands, like, hey, we put extra money in the budget for you to do this thing?
So what occurs is the ordinance, specifically a budget ordinance, their portion of the ordinance is actually sent out by OMB to each of the departments. And if there's anything special in it, it's drawn to their attention. I mean, and it's, hey, you're on page 56 of the ordinance. Many times there isn't anything. I mean, there's not. I mean, there are some things that the council does very specifically, and then there's times that this is your number. And so sometimes those emails are pretty bland, in that here's your budget for the year. But sometimes it is, and here's the asterisk that the council specified, And also, we ask the departments watch the budget process and pay attention to the budget process and make sure that they're aware of those conversations.
And if I could add, and I know Chair is aware of this because of last year, but, you know, when you are, or a future chair is discussing that substitute budget on the floor when the night it's presented, you usually go through and highlight all of the reasons why these increases are being made. So if it is just a numerical line item increase, so let's say, you know, Department A goes from 200,000 to 300,000, then on the floor you usually would say, and that money is being provided for this reason that was requested of us during a budget hearing, or whatever the case may be. And then also another way to communicate that to the boards, commissions, departments is through, you know, a press release that is usually accompanied, that usually accompanies the substitute budget as well. At this point, we don't do a letter. One other way that it's communicated is through the analysis. So the analysis usually will go through and say, here's the substitute budget, here are all of the changes, whether they are reductions or increases.
I'll add, in a year where the substitute doesn't pass unanimously, like this one, where those amendments and after amendments, those amendments actually do document the purposes of those changes. In fact, in the case of the $2 million for arts that you were just referring to, that you got in front of them and said this is the intent, that actual intent was struck out and had a substitute, was actually amended. That amendment was amended, and we used that multiple times this year for the arts as a reference. So those documents not go unused.
Thank you for that. I think that kind of highlights one of the bigger piece that I've been thinking about, which will also have could also have an impact on boards and commissions, and could also have an impact on the arts commission in particular. But I think that, like, one place where we are lacking is a little bit around the area of I hate to say enforcement, because I think that's a stronger word than what I want to use, but we are giving money to a department, and then the next year the department comes back, and I'm saying department, but departments, boards, commissions, all of them. We're giving money to entities. The next year the entity comes back. Sometimes there's conversation through the budget, what do we call those? Department hearings, right? Sometimes in those department hearings, you'll have people that will say, hey, for example, next year, my assumption would be that Council Lady Evans may say, hey, we gave y'all extra money, or Council Lady Allen, because it sounds like a question that one of the two of y'all would ask, or maybe Council Lady Sora. But, hey, we gave y'all extra money to extend the hours on reach. How did that go? Right? And then we wait for that department to, like, give us a response. That happens, I would say, most of the time. It doesn't always happen. So we don't know if we give Department A an extra amount of money and Department A says that they want to use it for something and maybe something else came up in the year. And I know that there are certain times they can use the money for other things, other times they can't use the money for other things. We don't always know how the money was necessarily used, and then it comes back to us the next year and we're given more money, but we don't necessarily know. So one thing that I had really been kind of like toying with, and so we do get a budget accountability report on a monthly basis from our departments. And now we will also have like a budget adjustment savings plan, because we put that in the budget because we are doing those targeted savings this year. So that is something that we put in to do that accountability for quarterly. But as far as like actual like goals that a department had or a commission had or a specific project that they asked for money for. So if someone said, can y'all give us more money to hire this position, and we give y'all money, the next year we don't necessarily know if they hired the position or didn't. So what I'm thinking, and would love you all's feedback on it, is like a budget transparency reporting tool. And I want to be really careful with the language, because I would love for this to be something that's like collaborative and not, I think if we're saying like budget oversight, or if we're saying certain words that we use may have a little bit more of a negative connotation, and the intent is not a negative connotation. The intent is how can we be more transparent through this process. So if we do like a budget transparency reporting tool, and starting off with like boards and commissions, but that are receiving money, so that quarterly they're able to track the funds that have been given to them and like how they're being spent. And also, like, how do they align with the goals that they said that they had when they came to us to ask us for that money? So that the following year, when we do our budget, we're able to track and say, okay, they have stayed on point with their budgetary goals. It helps us to kind of stay abreast of what's happening. If I understand correctly, with like the boards and commissions, because they have their own accounts, is not the same way as with like a Metro department that gives us that accountability report every month. So we don't necessarily see what's in the boards and commissions, right?
Some yes, some not. So some boards and commissions, such as the Arts Commission, is treated much like a department. There are others that are not. So there's different, it just depends on how they're set up and whether they're in or out of our financial system.
Thank you. And then like our school board and Metro General Hospital, they give us monthly reports. So we do have some entities that are providing, more transparency around their spending. But again, I would love to kind of get you all's thoughts on this. So Council Lady Allen, then Council Lady Sora.
Thank you. Just, if y'all can remind me, because I go poking in all these reports and I'm always, amazed to discover what's in there. So can y'all, can either Amanda or Director Darby talk about the level of detail that's by department in the monthly accountability report, the BAR, and then what shows up in the ACFR? I mean, I think rather than add another report to add to the ones that, there's so many, finding the relevant one can sometimes be a challenge, and those are very valuable when you take the time to dig into them. Is that detail already there if you dig down into it deep enough, or can it be sort of multi-layered so that you could explode it to get more detail anyway, or to, get driven to spreadsheets that have the backup?
Before you answer that, Amanda, I know the departments all give this, but for the boards and commissions, they don't give those reports, do they? Or do all of our boards and commissions give those reports?
I can't speak to all of the boards and commissions, but some of the boards and commissions are in the financial system and can be a part. I mean, I don't think they're part of our BAR reports presently, but can be, and it's because of their reporting structure. But and in many cases, it's some of their funding, because most of the bar reports, when you're looking at them, they're in the general fund. That's what, I mean, that's mostly what some of our, it's an area of priority for sure. But to answer your question, council member, the bar reports, as well as the ACFR, roll up into some very large categories. Primarily salaries, fringe, and other transfers. And you got in people that are, we'll say, been at Metro for a while, know what transfers mean, and that's here, there, it's like revenue in and out. And then the bar reports do go into a little bit more detail. You'll have a few more roll-up categories that you can look at and look at trends and see what's going on there. You know, do we have the data that can be broken down? Of course we have the data. We're reporting it that way. I'll say Councilmember Benedict has actually been working with the Finance Department on how to actually look at that into a little bit more further detail. So the data, of course, is there. It depends on how you really want to see it, and at what level is valuable to someone looking at it from an oversight looking down. You know, many times we're concerned about not going over. You know, Price is Right rules, lowest without going over, or highest without going over.
Right, and if I may say one more thing, just, I mean, I guess in my mind, what I'm thinking is, if we could see the big picture, and then say, ooh, we spent this much money on salaries, I wonder how that breaks down by department. And then within departments, ooh, I wonder how much of this is part-time and how much is full-time. I mean, all of that comes from that and comes up to that, but I don't know if it's done manually or if it's one spreadsheet behind another, and you could just keep digging into deeper and deeper spreadsheets. So, you know, however we can get information without creating more work, if it's already been done, then it's just a visibility issue, I think, would be, rather than creating a whole new report. That would just be my request.
And also, this is what I'm more so speaking to entities that are not giving us that report, right? So for the entities that right now there is no financial, I don't want to say oversight. We're not getting the report. You said what? Auditing. Thank you. That's a more neutral word.
Well, they are most certainly audited.
Don't want to put the wrong idea out there. So maybe auditing wasn't the right word. But for the entities that we are not getting are included in the bar report. So, Council Lady Sorora.
Thank you, Chair. Somewhere where Councilmember Allen is, because I know that we get a whole lot of that report, and I don't even think we look at it enough, or everybody even knows what they are, what they means. But I do think what I see is not the operations itself, if I understand clearly, is when we have this special project or special allocation. And so if we do a special allocation, for example, I spoke about it during budget, where we give the school an extra 21 million to cover because the states did not, they got less from the state. But we asked them how to make sure that that doesn't happen again. The education committee did that. So maybe what the chair is looking for is, if we give a special 2 million, a special 1 million, there should be a requirement that the department provides some report to council, whether it's quarterly or twice a year, to be able to say, this project that was specially funded, especially during this budget, this is what we did and this is where we are. Like an accountability report, but project specific. I think that's more where I will lean to. The overall general operations, salaries, and the other stuff that the department does every month, I don't think we need all of that. We can look at that through the bar report, is what I would recommend. We don't want to create too much work, but at the same time, we want to make sure we capture things that we're missing. And I think that detailed project report, especially to boards and commission, is where I would think we should focus on.
Thank you, Council Lady Soror. That was my intent. So thank you for summarizing that. My intent is specifically for when we are putting extra money in and wanting to ensure that it is, wanting to have some reporting back that it was used in the way that we intended for it to be used, so that when it comes back before the budget process again, we're able to say, based on the data that we have, if this was used in the way that we wanted it to be used, or, and there may be a good reason why it wasn't, right? And if they come back and say, hey, this happened and this was the reason why it couldn't go in that way, then we can make the decision on whether or not we want to fund that initiative again, or whatever the case may be. So, Councilor Soror, I think.
And I want to add real quickly, and I'll let Ms. Amanda speak, is that I also like the idea of your letter at the beginning of the budget period, where it actually sends something to them that says, in the money that you got this year, X amount is allocated to this project, and part of our requirement is that you submit a report. So your letter idea is a good one, and I think it can tie in with that. So.
Thank you. Ms. Deaton?
I just wanted to correct anything I said that might have been misleading. The Fund 10101, which is a general fund, and the bar reports, they do include some of the commissions that are funded that way. So that does have the Arts Commission, because I was thinking, I've seen a bar report for the Arts Commission, as well as MHRC and a handful of the others. But there are some that we still see, and you still have budgetary oversight that you do not see because they're not in that fund. So just wanted to make sure that was clear and that you can go and see where they are for their year-to-date revenue and expenses.
Thank you. Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to weigh in on? So my request for finance, is for us to continue the conversation, and by us continue the conversation, I can work with you all directly to kind of flesh out this idea a little more, and then we could bring it back to the Budget and Finance Committee, but would love to hear about some of the best practices that we're seeing across the country. I was also doing a little research earlier today, and I cannot find I was trying to pull up the website that I was on, but it was Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA. So they had some best practices on like reporting and transparency, as opposed to us lowly council members, except for Councilor Swear. But instead of like us council members saying this is what we think should be done, can you all come up with some recommendations of like what that transporting and reporting could look like, what that reporting, could look like, and I can work with you all directly, and then we come back and make some recommendations to the committee and just kind of continue that conversation to see like what makes sense. So, okay. Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to add? All right, so coming back to the piece of legislation, because I think we do need to kind of think through what makes sense, and then also if we want there to be next steps as far as, do we want to have another special call meeting to kind of continue to discuss this? I think that if we're working with finance and we come up with some recommendations, that's something that I can like send, ask Director Darby to send to the committee, or we could put it on Council Connect, and that could just be added on to the end of one of our budget meetings, so we don't have to necessarily do another specially called meeting, unless it runs into something that will take an extensive amount of time. But I think that we'll be able to address this behind another budget meeting, so we don't have to do a special call one. As far as the legislation, are you all feeling as though, and we can't take a vote because we don't have quorum, so I'm not asking people to vote, but I would love to just kind of hear where people are, because we'll need to make a decision for Tuesday on if it makes sense to move forward, because I think it's on second reading on Tuesday, Director Darby? Yeah, it's on second reading on Tuesday, so needing to think through if we want to move forward with it as is on second reading, if we want to try to defer it again to give the boards and commissions working group the opportunity to continue the work that they're doing, if we want to allow it to kind of continue, since we'll still have the opportunity to add a council member later if we determine that we want to do that. So just wanted to kind of talk through some of those options. And the at-larges are jumping over here. So Council Lady Soror, then Council Lady Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to speak to the deferral or not deferral, go with the will of the body. but I do have a thought on the legislation itself. One of my concern when we were first listening to the hearing the bill when it first came to us was on the requirements for the department to submit a resolution every year. My thought has always been that right now they had a requirement to do a resolution. That was never followed up, and that's okay. We didn't know about it. But I also look at resolution as something that we take through one meeting. We may not look at it as we need to. That was why I did the amendment that was suggesting that we do not need to be looking at their procedure in detail every year if there's no change. It's not good for us, it's not good for them. But I know that we want to look at it if there is a change. And so my recommendation is that if the criteria remains the same, they do a resolution. We see a resolution and we know that, oh, it's continued the same way as what we discussed the last time we let it go. But if there's a change in the criteria, then I would recommend that it should be an ordinance. Then it gives us the flag that, okay, something is changing, we need to have more conversation, and we need to take our time in approving it. So if that is still up for conversation, that's an amendment that I think I would like for us to consider, so that every year we're not thinking, is it changing, is it not changing, and do we talk clock, do we keep it? I think if you see a resolution is not changing, if you see an ordinance, it's what's more conversation is changing. I wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Council Lady Sawyer. Council Lady Allen.
Thank you. And in line in that, I think that's a very good amendment, and I supported it when it came through before. So if you were to offer it on Friday, which is when it would be due, then, that's right, don't forget that. You just have to request it on Wednesday. I would also be interested in being reminded what the schedule's supposed to be for arts to either decide to stick with the same criteria they have or to adjust that, because if their grant process is sort of working on a calendar year and they're expecting applications in January, then they should be sending stuff out in September, October about what the criteria is, so they may be in the middle of it right now. And therefore, that may give us a little bit more urgency in terms of at least passing that part of the process and then dealing with the number part later. So can somebody speak to what that timing is for the criteria for the Arts Commission? So, because I think we're specifically talking about that now, right?
Ms. Deaton-Moyer, are you able to speak to that? I was at the last meeting where they discussed it, and my understanding was that there was going to be a delay this year, but I'll let Ms. Deaton-Moyer speak to it.
I can't talk in specifics, but I know that there's lots of conversation. The conciliation group is determined by the conciliation agreement, which was signed by Metro Legal and Arts, as well as MHRC, who represented the complainants. They're working on a thought process for what was the Thrive program. And so there is a sense of the operating grants and the Thrive program, what was the Thrive program has to be kind of worked out because of the funding delineation. So I can't give you a timeline, but I do know that it is working with that conciliation that group. That group has met now 3 times, and now has its member and is working with haste.
Thank you. My concern, and then Council Lady Evans Siegel, I'll call on you next. I think my concern about it when we were looking at the substitute, which would require it to go to a special meeting of the I don't know what the new name of that committee is, the Parks Committee, Parks and Libraries and Arts. It would have to go to that committee before it could be filed. So that would be one meeting there, and then it would still have to go through 3 readings of the council, which means that it would be 2 months. So in a process that is already taking a long time, delaying it by 2 months, I think that, one, it makes it, it just puts an undue burden on artists, taking a longer time for them to get the money. That feels less equitable to me. Like, that's more barriers, there's more red tape. And I think even if we are, to Council Lady Sawyer's point about the, not the 3 readings, going through 3 readings, if there is a change, I do think that, we as council members can also participate in this process, whether there's a council member on their board or commission or not, right? Like, I've been to several arts commissions meetings. I know Council Lady Stiles, Council Lady Evans, Council Lady Sepulveda talks about watching them online, right? So we still can participate. We can have conversations with commissioners and directors and things of that nature. So we're not, we don't have to be completely removed from the process. And I think that we can be aware of the changes in the criteria and vote on it in one meeting. My concern with 3 meetings is, again, just kind of delaying the process. And I think even with the resolution, it being one meeting, if there are concerns, we could always defer it for a meeting, but it doesn't tie our hands to 3 meetings, because we may love the changes and be ready to go forward with them in one meeting. And now we've kind of tied ourselves to 3 readings. Whereas if it's a 1 reading and we have concerns, we could always defer it and continue to work through it. So, Council Lady Evans Siegel.
Thank you. And I think you Chair, spoke to a lot of my concerns with 3 readings. I hadn't thought about the change versus not change, and I kind of need to sit with that. But I think where I still sort of land in all this is we are looking at this holistically, and as somebody who has served not just on traffic and parking now, but as an unpaid citizen on a board or commission, changes within the structure of that board and commission can be really, really difficult as, relatively unstaffed, or sometimes just unstaffed for fun for 18 months because nobody's there because y'all steal Miss Darby and nobody puts anybody back in the mayor's office. Who, by the way, should never have been the administrator of my board and commission, but ended up being, right? So these changes can be really disruptive to the order of business. And I know I kind of keep saying this, and, the response I get is, well, we can change it again after the study. But again, we are talking about unpaid volunteers who are really serving our community in an incredible, little D democratic way. And I think changing it to maybe change it again is really disruptive to their business. I also think similarly, ordinances, potentially multiple readings, can be disruptive. It's really hard because we are supposed to be part-time and we're supposed to keep up with all the boards and commissions. I recommend watching them in double time. I find that really allows me to, get through them, right? And you can do it in the car. You can do it like an audio book in the car on double time and just knock it out. And I know you're having to drive in. I sat in that traffic today too. That's why I was late. But I am really hesitant to change anything today if we're going to have to, in 6, 9, 12 months, change it, just based on my own personal experience as somebody who has served on one of these boards. And then I also I'm going to sit with this idea that was thrown out. But my initial reaction is that I am also hesitant to require changes be read by ordinance, because again, we can defer them, but when you're on these boards and commissions, they already move pretty slowly anyway, and this idea of sort of dragging it out, when it's really our job as the paid elected officials to oversee it and to speak up when we feel we need to, and we, at the end of the day, have the power of the purse. So if we don't like what they do, the next year that can be reflected in our actions. If we, have concerns.
Thank you, Council Lady Evans Siegel. I also watched the meetings on double time, so nice to know that great minds think alike. Mr. Rosenberg?
Appreciate the discussion. I would just add, with regard to this proposal to have a pre-reading and then 3 additional readings, to my knowledge, that would be the only piece of legislation with that requirement in metro government. Also, I fear that creating 2 different processes based on whether there's a change or not could have the unintended consequence of making the commission hesitant to make a minor but important change, because it would delay the process by that much longer. So, for your consideration.
Thank you for that. And Council Lady Evans Siegel, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with one of the things I was kind of thinking about too. I'm really leaning towards, and I've been clear, I don't think we need a council member on the Arts Commission, right? So I just want to be super clear about that. However, I want to defer to the will of the body. And if the body determines that that's what we want and need, then okay. But I think that that does need to be looked at through the holistic process. And I think that it's more disruptive to put someone on now, and then in a few months, if we make the determination, take them back off. I think that's more disruptive to the work that they do, as opposed to if we pass it now without making changes to the body makeup, continue this conversation around boards and commissions, let the working group do the work that they're doing, bring that legislation to us. We have the conversation on what needs to be, which boards and commissions need a council member on it. And if it is the will of the body that we say arts is one of those boards, cool, put it on there, vote on it at that time, and we're making one change for multiple departments, and we're not being so disruptive. So that's where I'm leaning. Did anyone else want to weigh in as we kind of wrap this meeting up? Any additional burning thoughts that anyone may have? Okay, it's kind of want to gauge where people are, so we kind of think through what Tuesday may look like also. So if any final thoughts anybody want to share? Okay, seeing none, all hearts and minds look clear. With that, I will just kind of wrap us up. So I'll be working with the Finance Committee to talk about what a budget transparency report could potentially look like. Mr. Rosenberg is going to take back to the Boards and Commission, to the Boards and Commissions working group, the conversation around what would it look like for council members to serve on additional boards or commissions, and which make recommendations on which boards and commissions they believe will be beneficial to have a council member on. And then I am also, just kind of as a bigger scheme, making a few changes to the budget process, and part of that will be sending in a letter, which I did email to a couple of the departments this year, and so this will kind of go in line with that, but in essence, like a letter from the budget chair that is when we are making like significant changes to the mayor's proposed budget and in the substitute budget, for those significant changes, if it is for a certain thing, making sure that they understand, hey, this is for this particular program at 3/4 of the year or for the full year or whatever that is, to make sure that they have the understanding of that was what the money was put in for. Any additional questions, comments, concerns? I think that we're good without a follow-up meeting, but just to continue this conversation at the next Budget and Finance meeting in which we have information. So if we don't have any information by Tuesday, we want to address it Tuesday. We'll just give a recap of this. But once we get that information, then we will put that on the agenda at our next Budget and Finance Committee meeting. All right, with that, thank you all so much for joining. Y'all have a great rest of the night. Meeting adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.